And welcome back to the second installment of our Introduction to MATLAB tutorials. Today I will be discussing just basic matrix and vector commands. This is one thing that I feel is pretty useful, seeing that in MATLAB it is default to uh, it's defaulted your data is automatically saved as a vector or matrix, depending on the size of it. So that matrix vector commands are very useful in that. Now the first one I'll be going over is the I command. This creates an identity matrix. Now understanding this may require a little bit of background in linear algebra, but basically an identity matrix is similar to one in in algebra. So if you have 3 times 1, it equals 3. Same being if you have matrix A times identity matrix, that equals matrix A. So that is how the identity matrix works. And to show you how to create an identity matrix, we use the I command, so EYE. And for this example, I'll create a 5 by 5. But it should be noted to make sure that M, so your first input, is the number of rows and N is the number of columns. That's messed me up a couple times, so just get that down and really know it goes row column. So that's something that will provide useful in the future. So we see if we create an identity matrix of a 5 by 5, we have our 1s across the main diagonal and then 0s everywhere else, and those are the properties of an identity matrix. So that is our I command. Now moving on to the ones command, similar to our is command, it creates a matrix, but this time it's just ones. So again, M rows, N columns, so we'll just do a 5 by 5 matrix of just ones, run that, and we see that that is our output. And so that is how you create a matrix just full of ones. Like our ones command, we also have a zeros command. So this does almost the same thing, but instead of ones, it's zeros. So if we create a zeros 5 by 5, we will have a just 5 by 5 matrix full of zeros. So that's how you would use the zeros command, and that's what the output would be. Now for the sum command, this is for vectors. So I'll show you what it looks like if you do it on a matrix, but I would use this for vectors. So we'll just create an arbitrary vector v, and I'll go into creating vectors later. But so let's just say v is our velocity, so it would be like 2 meters per second in the x direction, 3 in the y, and 4 in the z, which is something that you may see. Now say we wanted to find the sum of those, we would just do sum of v and see that that equals to 9. So that's how you would find the sum of a vector with the sum command. Now the length, let me show you what happens if we do a sum of a matrix. So let's just go to our, we'll create an I 5 by 5. We'll say that x equals a 5 by 5 identity matrix. So if I went and summed x, then we would see that it just sums our columns. So we see we only have 1 in the first, and we have a 1 in each column with the rest being zeros. So it sums those columns and outputs it as such. So if you want to use that, you can. I haven't come across any circumstances where I've used that, but if you need to find just the sum of your columns, then that works. And so that's how you would do that. Length. So the length command, I've used this a good bit. So we'll continue our 2, 3, 4 example from previous, and say we want to know how many sets of data we have, or number of elements is a better word. Let's see, how do we not find the number of elements in our vector v? So we would go and use the length command, find out the length of v, and we find out that it is 3, which is consistent with our x, y, and z from our velocity example. So we have 3 elements in our v, which is what we found. And now this also will work with matrices. So if I do, again, I'll do my 5 by 5 I. I want to know the length of it. It will tell me that there's 5. Now again, this is, you're not really seeing the whole picture. You're just seeing that there's 5 basically 5 columns, and that is showing you the length. Now we can do some manipulation to figure out other things as far as like the total amount of elements, but I won't be going over that here. This right now is just a basic commands. So that's how you would find the length of a vector. And so here we do, oh, this is how to form a vector. So again, showing you that example, you want to use brackets to create a vector. So we would do 2, 3, 4 like our example, and we see that our output is 2, 3, 4. And so that is what you would want to use to create an actual vector. And so we see if we try and use parentheses, that doesn't work. So you got to use brackets, and that's something that could trip you up, because you may think, oh, because notation is usually in written form, it's parentheses, but in MATLAB we want to use brackets to really get across the fact that it's a vector or a matrix. So that's how you would do that. Separating columns. So for this, again with our example, so we would create our vector of 2, 3, 4, and we want to separate these. So you can't just put two, like you can't just have 234. It's just going to show you one element of 234. So if we want to denote it as a vector of 3 elements, being 2, 3, and 4, we got to use commas. And another thing that you can also use is just the space. So there we go. And now also that's a room for error, because say you did want to type in 234, but you accidentally put a space in there, then it'll show up as 23 and 4. So that's something to look out for and to be mindful of when you're doing these calculations, or just actually basic inputs. So that's how you separate them. And also, so this is a little more advanced part. That's why I saved it for last. So say we wanted to create, we'll say, just to make it easy, a 2 by 2 matrix. So we have 2, 2, and then we want to separate that row with a 2. Actually, to show you how it's going to look, we'll do 2, 3, and then we want to separate that row with we want to use the semicolon, and then 3, 4. And then I'll show you what M looks like. So if we run this, we see we have a 2 by 2. Our first input being 1, 1, and then that being our 2, 1, or 1, 2 as far as matrix notation. But so we have the first row here. We have our first row, which is 2, 3, and then our semicolon breaks it up into our second row, being 3, 4. So that's how you would do that. And yeah, that's just a basic overview of some of the matrix and vector commands. These will be very helpful to you and very useful in calculations, and when you're working with matrices and vectors, which you will be doing a lot in MATLAB, so it's very helpful. All right, thank you, and that's going to be all.